All right, everybody, here we go. Part B of Unit 1. We're going to talk a little bit about vulnerability and fear. I put some really good videos up for this, especially the one by Brené Brown, which I highly suggest you watch. It's one of the most compelling TED Talks I've ever seen. But let's talk a little bit about vulnerability and fear. Fear is a really interesting thing when it comes to presentation skills. And when I do my classes in person with people, I will go around the table and ask everybody to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about themselves, and everybody does a pretty good job with that. The very next thing I do is I ask them to stand up and come up in front of the class and tell a personal story. And I call that the 5 steps of fear, because they could sit at the table, speak totally calm, have good things to say, not be nervous, but as soon as they stand up and walk 5 feet to the front of the table, some of them you can visually see their hands and faces and bodies start to shake. The voice starts to do this, and they lose complete, almost control of their body. And it's because fear is coming in, and we're going to talk about why that happens. But let's start with vulnerability. And Courtney Love said it great. In rock and roll, it's really about being as vulnerable as possible and giving them what they want. And that's really the truth with any kind of presentation, any kind of performance. Remember, a presentation isn't a meeting, it's performance. It's your opportunity to perform in front of an audience. Again, whether it's 3 people or 300, I don't care. When you are presenting, you are performing. And to really be a solid performer, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. And vulnerable has a negative connotation to it. As Brené Brown says, it's a dark word. Vulnerability isn't a bad thing. It's the ability to open yourself up and take a chance and do something magnificent and different, unique, authentic. Vulnerability means taking a chance. And what Brené Brown says is that we fear that we are not worthy, and that disconnects us. How often have you been asked to present at work or at school or somewhere, and you're like, oh man, I am not the person to be doing this. I am not smart enough. I'm not a good presenter. I'm not quick-witted. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not good looking enough. I don't have a good voice. Whatever it is, you start to feel that you're not worthy. Now, somebody asked you to get up and speak in front of a client or in front of a classroom or in front of a group of colleagues. And the reason they asked you to do this is because they believe you can. And you have to remember that. But a lot of times we fear that we're not worthy. And as soon as you start playing those lines in your head, and you start beating yourself up, you have disconnected yourself from the audience because you are no longer authentic, you are no longer real, you're in your head, you have no confidence, and you're disconnected because many things happen when that occurs. But when you feel you're not worthy, your body language shows it, your voice shows it, you have no inflection in your voice, you just get up there and say, I don't really have much to say. And as soon as that happens, you've disconnected the audience, and they're focusing on your physical issues rather than the content and the substance of what you're saying. So it's a very interesting quote, and I really love it because when we fear we're not worthy, it disconnects us from our audience, and we are losing an opportunity, as I've said before, to persuade them, to take them on a journey, and help them change their mind about something. So Brené says this in the TED Talk that you're going to watch. But we have to be willing to be vulnerable, and vulnerable means do something where there are no guarantees. It's a simple line, but it's a big ask. Because when you get up there and you do something where there are no guarantees, you are being vulnerable, you're opening yourself up to ridicule, you're opening yourself up to judgment, you're opening yourself up to failure. Because you don't know if it's going to work. But wow, what an opportunity to get up in front of an audience and do something where there's no guarantees. Oftentimes, it's just simply telling a story because people don't expect that. In fact, the brain craves the unexpected. We want to do things that are different when we have that opportunity to get up and speak in front of them, and we have to be willing to be vulnerable, to try, to take a chance to do something different. When you get up there and you're like, you know what, I'm going to talk about this product, but I'm going to talk about it in an exciting way. I'm not saying you get up and sing and dance, but maybe you do because that will guarantee something is going to happen, and they would never expect that, and you're definitely, 2 weeks later, they're going to remember you. So Theodore Roosevelt has this amazing quote, and I'm going to read it, which, because we're online and you're sort of not seeing me, the last thing you want to do is read a slide, but I'm going to read this quote. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows, in the end, the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And what Roosevelt is saying there is that you've got to go out and try, because if you don't try, you'll never know. And you'll be with all those other people who don't try, right? You know, the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, right? Who spends himself in worthy cause. You know, you go out there marred by dust, sweat, and blood when you present, tell that story, engage the audience, take a chance. Because when you walk into the arena, you have to expect a few things. Fear, self-doubt, and we're going to talk about fear, but self-doubt, I'm not good at this. Comparison, oh man, do you see Julie? She is awesome at this. There's no way I'm going to be as good as her. Anxiety, we know what that is. That's where fear will bring on anxiety. Nervousness and uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen. Am I going to be any good? Are they going to listen to me? Am I going to make a point? Am I going to lose it? Am I going to pass out? Right? All these things are playing in your mind. Tracy Morgan had this amazing quote. If you all know who Tracy Morgan is, great comic, Saturday Night Live, 30 Rock. And he got in a terrible accident a couple of years ago, and he came back. And when he was on Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy said, hey, are you nervous to go back on the road? And Tracy Morgan looked at Jimmy and he said, you know what? Nervous people can't wait for it to end. Excited people can't wait for it to begin. Same exact feeling, nervousness and excitement, butterflies in the stomach, heart rate's racing, all these types of things, but he framed it differently. He framed it his own way. I'm not nervous. I'm excited. So fear, let's talk about fear. Fear is deep-rooted in your DNA, especially when it comes to presentation skills. I know, sounds funny, but think about it. You are asked to speak at 9 a.m., let's say 11 a.m., on a Tuesday morning, and it's Monday afternoon. They've asked you to speak. Well, what happens? You get the fight or flight. Oh, that's when your heart starts to beat, and you start to sweat, and your muscles tense up, and you're like, I'm either going to go out there and fight this, or I'm going to run. And most of us want to run. You get that feeling. Your DNA is starting to sort of explode, and you want to have fight or flight. Now, the thing is, we had fight or flight for a reason. We have this response for a reason. It is from thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago when this thing was chasing us. When this thing chased us, our bodies had to get ready. Our heart rate had to pump. Our blood had to get to our muscles. We had to sweat. We had to warm up because we were either going to run as quickly as we can, and we needed our muscles, or we were going to fight this thing. And we needed our muscles. That is what's happening. But we don't sit in the middle of a field or walk across a prairie thinking that something's going to get us. In fact, the wolves and the tigers of our lives are our bosses and our audiences. But because we are just cavemen, we still have the same visceral response. Because what it is, it's your stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. So at 3 p.m. on a Monday, someone asked you to speak. Well, your cortisol kind of kicked in. But really at 9 a.m., and you're looking at your watch and you're looking at your clock and you're like, oh, I got to speak at 11 in 2 hours, your cortisol clicks in. That's when you start to feel a little nervous, maybe a little bit of sweat, but your body's starting to build up. Blood's starting to pump a little bit. And then at around 10:30, 10:45, right before you're about to go on, adrenaline is flowing through your body. That's when you really start to sweat. Your heart rate is going because you're getting ready to run away from a saber-toothed tiger, but that's not what's happening anymore. You're just going into a room to speak in front of people, right? So you're out of control, you're fearful, and your heart rate is pumping, and you're starting to sweat. And as soon as that cycle starts, you can't get out of it. But what's happening is the stress hormones are flowing through your system. So what you have to do, you have to burn them off. Keep calm and do jumping jacks. I tell people all the time, if you are feeling nervous before a presentation, it's at 11 o'clock, at 10:30, your adrenaline is pumping, go into the stairwell and do stairs. Go out into the parking lot and run wind sprints. Burn it off. Do push-ups, whatever you have to do. Do jumping jacks. Do something where you can burn it off, because that's all your body is doing. It's preparing for fight or flight. So it's prepared. Now burn off all of that energy. Sure, you may still be nervous. You may still be excited. You may still have some fear, but you're not shaking anymore. And your voice isn't doing this. And your hands aren't shaking. And you're not sweating. And you're not focusing on it because you've burned it off. Amy Cuddy, who also gave a great TED Talk, said, if you feel like you shouldn't be somewhere, right? So you're nervous. You don't want to be there. Fake it. Do it not until you make it, but until you become it. So this is something else that can help you get over your fears. What you do is you start doing power poses, right? My favorite, Wonder Woman. But this pose is really interesting because they asked blind people to show what victory looks like, and they put their hands up like this. People who have never seen before. This is the victory sign, right? So before a presentation, if you're feeling unsure of yourself, go into the bathroom, find a stall, and stand like this or like this for 5 minutes. Pick your spine up, straighten your spine up, stand up straight, take deep breaths, feel strong. What Amy's saying is the more you do this, the more you fake it, the more you become it. Because you are standing tall, you are feeling good, you are feeling confident. The three things you want to focus on is educating your audience, inspiring your audience, and engaging your audience. That's the content. That's the story. That's what you're getting across. You have to start to overcome fear so that you can feel more comfortable with yourself and really focus on your content. Because again, you have to be respectful of the audience. There is nothing worse than being in an audience and watching a presenter fail. How many of you get second-hand fear? Second-hand fear. That's when you can see the fear of the speaker and you start to bring it on yourself. You start to sweat. You start to breathe heavily. You are starting to experience fight or flight because you're either going to stand up and smack this person in the sense or you're going to run out of the room because you're feeding off their energy. So as a speaker, if you are having this energy, it's not respectful to the audience because they're going to focus on it and they're not going to pay attention to you and they're not going to be engaged and they're not going to be persuaded and they're not going to know what happened. And 2 weeks later, they're going to say, I have no idea what Bob said, but man, was he nervous. I couldn't get over his voice and his shaking. Again, easier said than done, I get it, but these are things you need to think about when you are presenting.